Hi, I'm Kelly at Book and Paper Arts, and today I'm going to talk about mark making with tea and coffee. A lot of us already use tea to dye our pages and then put them in our journals. This idea is just an extension of that. Instead of just dyeing the pages for that pretty parchment color, I'm going to show you how to use tea and coffee to make backgrounds. Different mixed media techniques for decorating pages. And then you can use those decorated pages in your journals or as embellishment to fill up space in a beautiful, interesting way that adds texture and layer. If you like journal arts, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure and turn on the notifications. And that way you will have more journal arts in your life. Let's go make some marks. Before we get to the fun part, there are two things that I get asked about a lot. And one is about, will these materials mold? Obviously, tea and coffee are plant-based. But no, they will not mold any more than a plant-based ink or dye would. Just make sure your papers are really dry before you start using them in your project. Let them dry overnight, you'll be fine. 2, tea and coffee do contain tannins, which can be corrosive. But believe me, I've got papers that I made 20 years ago with tea and coffee that are just fine. So if you're looking for archival quality, this may not be your friend, but otherwise, don't worry about the tannins. You're going to be fine. I've made some tea and some coffee. I've made the tea very strong. This is about 3 tea bags for less than a cup of water. You can make it more dilute if you like. And this is coffee water that I made with instant coffee, about 2 or 3 spoons. You can, of course, use brewed coffee, but I am limiting my caffeine intake, and I feel the better for it. So I just went out and bought some coffee granules. Get the cheapest ones. On this page, I've just drawn off a grid so that I can show you some of the different basic mark making ideas. And I'm going to start out by getting some tea in my pipette. And you know what? I'm just going to draw some lines like this. You could make a basket weave hatch kind of thing. Let's see. Now I'm going to take some coffee. And these ideas are all the same whether you're using tea or coffee. It's just you may prefer one or the other. This is more of a chocolate color while the tea is more of a caramel color. So they're just options that you have. I really like this pattern. Now I'm going to let those dry, and be aware that the tea and coffee inks that you're using here are going to dry pretty darker than they look initially. So don't be put off if they look a little bit light. They're going to dry darker. Let's see. Again, now we're just making marks. You don't have to use a pipette. You could use a brochette or a brush or a dip pen, whatever you've got that you like. Let's see. This is the tea. I'm just going to make some patterns and pull that out. Like that. There is, of course, the ever popular coffee ring. I'm not using a cup of coffee, but you could. I'm using a teeny tiny teacup because I like this size. And then you get that really popular, I've even seen stencils of coffee rings, so you know it's popular. And if you don't have a teeny tiny teacup, you know what you could use is any kind of a jar or lid that's got a round shape to it. There is the, let's see, that was with the coffee. Now I'm just going to do some blotches, you know, just move them out a little bit. And see what happens when those dry. In a slightly more controlled version of that, I'm going to this is the coffee. And again, I'm using the pipette, but you could use a brush. And I'm just making circles of different sizes. And that's, you know, something that you could use to fill up a page. If you had some edges that needed a little bit of oomph. So that's a kind of a version of painting with the coffee. And while we're on the painting, let's look at a technique that we use in watercolor, which is called wet on wet. And that's where this is wet on dry. We've just added the color to a dry page. But now I'm going to take some clean water and again make a circular shape here. And then I'm going to fill that up, that water, with my color. It's going to stay in that circle of water. It just does. And so when it dries, it pools in some interesting ways. And you can use any kind of shape that you like. Let's see. Let's go over here and I'll make a kind of a square shape. And I'm going to add the color and it's going to stay inside the square. Oh, it's bleeding a little bit because I made a mess. And I am here for the mess. So we're just going to let that dry. For the next pattern, I'm going to use a makeup sponge. And this is super cheap. I got it at the discount store, a big bag of them. And I've dipped it in the tea and squeezed it out. And now I'm going to just make some block shapes. Just random. That again, I'll show you after that dries, it's going to go quite a bit darker. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And here's another version of that. And this time I'm using the coffee water to make a checkerboard. This is very abstract. See, the squares are bleeding into each other, but that is fine. I really, really like that. In this square, again, I'm going to add some water, but I'm not making a pool of water like I did. This is just a little bit more, just painting with some water. And I'm going to take some of these coffee granules and just put them on top like this. I know it's almost like, does anybody out there use Brusho? you know, the crystals, you add them to the watercolor crystals, you add them to the water, and then they bloom. That's what's happening here. I'm just going to leave those and see what happens when they react with the water. Here is that checkerboard, the abstract checkerboard made with a makeup sponge, but it's in a bigger format. And I'm crazy about this one. But you can also make a tidier version, just for some contrast, or if you prefer tidy. Who are we kidding? I've taken some masking tape and I've just made it into a checkerboard here. And now I'm going to take my coffee. I've put some of the coffee water into a spritzer. And I forgot that when I use my spritzer on my work table, I need to put something down, or it will end in tears. So I'm just going to cover the page. Again, you could use a brush or that makeup sponge again. This is just an easy way to cover a lot of space fast. And I'm going to let that dry. And now I'm going to pull up the masking tape. More of the paper came up with the masking tape than I expected. And that's okay. This is a very distressed look by its nature. So, one, it's already still going to make a strong background. So we could start that as a collage page. And I wanted to show you, you can do the same thing here with the abstract checkerboard. I do like these for backgrounds. But also, and especially if you have one that maybe wasn't quite what you were expecting, make it into fodder. You know, just tear it into pieces that you can then put into your journal pages. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit more towards the end of the video. Last week, I showed an artist book that I made using pages that were tea drizzled. And I'm going to show you how I did that. You just want to take your page. For the book, I used a bigger piece, but this is how it works. I prefer tea to coffee for this, but by all means try coffee. And I'm using my pipette again to just make squiggles. And in a way, this is like asmic writing. Asmic writing is something I'll be talking about in the future, and it's where you make figures that look like letters of an imagined alphabet. And sometimes I even do that, especially if I'm in a mood. I might pick a word like grace. And then I'm just going to do my squiggled version of that word. And then when I use this, it's not really identifiable, but I know what it means. Kind of chaos writing. When this dries, and it does take quite a while to dry because you got some thick pools there. One, it is going to dry darker than you think. Two, I then turn the paper over and do both sides. And then I've got something that I can, again, make into a book page. Or you could just use it for more of that fodder and get your stash going. You can use stencils with your coffee and tea water. You're not going to get the perfect resolution that you sometimes expect because it will bleed and feather, but I just love that distressed look. If you want to try this, you need a stencil that is not too detailed or filigree because of that bleeding and feathering. So this one was the Harlequin pattern, nice and basic. That turned out okay. And this is one I use a lot. It was actually super cheap. I got it at the big box store when I was visiting my family in Mississippi. I think it was like maybe in hardware. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's got a very basic pattern. And I tried putting this down with a makeup sponge, like you sometimes do with a blending tool, but I didn't like the effect. I could not get one to turn out right. I have better luck spritzing. Do not overdo it. That is where the bleeding is going to come, and a little bit of artful feathering is one thing, but you don't want it to be too mushy. Yeah. And remember, it will dry darker, so don't second guess that part. And now you can use those as pages in your book, as a background. That's what I like to use these for. So if you're doing card making or collage, and then you can also, again, tear them up into bits of fodder to go in your stash. Stencil adjacent, mark making wise, is bubble wrap. What can I say? If they're going to keep putting soft plastics in our packaging, let's turn them into art supplies. I am going to use some tea here. And you could just sponge this on. But again, you get that quick coverage here. It doesn't look like much. Okay. Now, if you've ever done printing, say with a gel plate, you know your first print is messy. So I'm going to make my first print on my scrap piece. Okay, now, so that first pull got rid of a little bit of the excess liquid. So that now we're going to get more of that bubble wrap image. I just think this is so cool because nobody will quite know what it is. You just got all these dots. Dots everywhere. Now, what I like to do, again, you've got background here, but I like to wait until this is dry and then do it on the other side. Do both sides. And now we've got a cool page to go into a small journal. This technique is a little bit more of the watercolor family technique. I'm going to paint a circle with I'm using the coffee water, but you know, you can use the tea water, the tea wash, and I'm just making some shapes. It's mark making after all. But now that I've got this down here, I want to work into it using a water-soluble pencil. This is a Derwent, I don't know what it is, but you could use any kind of watercolor pencil or stick that you have. I'm holding it very lightly and just drawing shapes into it. And it's reacting, the pencil's reacting with the liquid. And so you really can play around with this a lot. Because that water-soluble ink thing is going to bleed and feather and move and look really great. You know what? While that's still damp, I'm going to just layer some techniques here and add some coffee granules. Just a very, very few into that those damp circles. We'll see what happens. And then there are drizzles. I am mad about drizzling. You just go to the top of your page and then let that go where it wants to go. You can activate it with a little bit more water or liquid. Work it around. And it's going to add drama to anything that you are working on. Such as this. This is actually a scrap piece of paper that I've been using throughout the prep for the video to mop up bits. But now look what happens if I add some drizzles. They're going to go in there and, I don't know, just really complement it somehow. And now it's not going to be a scrap paper. I'm definitely going to be keeping this to use in some work when it dries. Those are the techniques. Now let's look at a couple of ways that you can use these in your work. This is one of the small pages dyed with the bubble wrap. And I'm going to turn it into a journal page. This is a mini journal that I've been working with for some time. I just keep filling more stuff in there. And I've made a hinge with the masking tape. Put that there. And do it again over here. I don't think we'll go. And now in this journal, I've got the bubble wrap page and I can put some on there. You can also use it to fill up space in pages that you are working in. This is also an illustrated journal that I started last year. And I actually don't think this page needs more, but I thought I would show because it does have some space here. Now I'm just going to go in and paint with the tea and do some mark making. See, is that tea? Yeah, that's tea. With some hatches and lines. And now that's filling up that space and just adding a little bit of extra interest and layer and texture. let's have a last look at some of these pages that have dried. As you can see, they have mostly gone quite a bit darker than when I was showing them going onto the page. This is the one where I've used the crystals. Just put the crystals on a little damp bit of corner, and I really like how that just kept growing and blooming. That looks good. That might be one of my favorite techniques. Here it is where I added it to that wet on wet. Here is an example of that where that's what I've done here, and I used too much liquid. So the coffee crystals kept blooming until they were... I don't hate it. It's just different. And so this is with a lot of water, and this is with just damp. Just a splotch. Drizzles. Scribbles and stencils. I made this piece of watercolor paper into a grid just so that I could show the different examples of marks. But now that it's dried, it looks so good that I want to turn it into something else. And that something else is going to be a mini journal. Last week's video showed how to make a meander book with one piece of paper. If you missed last week's video showing how to make this book, there's a link to that video in the text box below this one. Or you can just scroll back one. Take one piece of paper and fold it, and then cut and fold. Just going to fold in on each other with a fan or an accordion fold. And hey, presto, a really adorable, one-of-a-kind mini book. And I might add a cover to that, maybe glue some of these pages down. We will see. There you go. If you like the content on this channel and you would like to help support it, you can do just that by following the link that's in the text box below this video. It'll take you to Ko-fi and you can help support this channel. If you have any feedback or any questions, especially if you have ideas about using tea and coffee in your own work, please put it in the comments and then we can all read it and compare notes. Until later, get up and go make something. Bye.